Peace Report, I'm Amy Goodman. The rising star of the conservative Tea Party movement, Minnesota Congresswoman Michele Bachmann, launched a bid for the Republican 2012 presidential nomination yesterday.
Good morning. It is so great to be here in Iowa this morning, and even better to be here in Waterloo, where I was born. I think it is entirely fitting that we are here today at the Snowden House, the site that was once the Waterloo Women's Club. So thank you for being here. My name is Michele Bachmann. I stand here in the midst of many friends and many family members to announce formally my candidacy for President of the United States.
On the eve of her announcement, Bachmann was tied with Mitt Romney in the Des Moines Register's Iowa poll, the first survey of voters who plan to attend the Republican caucuses. The Tea Party favorite and former tax lawyer identifies as a conservative Christian, is a fierce opponent of abortion and gay marriage. On CBS on Sunday, she commented on New York legalizing gay marriage.
I stand for the proposition that marriage is between a man and a woman. I think that Minnesota, for instance, this year, just about a month ago or so, passed at the legislative level the constitutional amendment to allow the people to decide what the definition of marriage will be. So that ballot question will be on the ballot in 2012. The people of New York came to a different conclusion. I think what we know is that ultimately you have all the various laws in the various states. There'll be a conflict if someone from Pennsylvania or from New York, for instance, moves to a state where marriage is between a man and a woman. Will these marriages be recognized? Ultimately, it'll go to the courts. As President of the United States, I will only nominate judges who are not activist judges, who are not legislating from the bench. And so I think that's why it's going to be very important to have this
Would that
debate.
be a litmus test for you, someone who was for same-sex marriage?
I want people who are for the Constitution. That's my litmus test.
That was Congressmember Michele Bachmann being interviewed by Bob Schieffer on CBS. She also supports teaching intelligent design in public schools and has claimed that global warming is a hoax. Bachmann has largely built her campaign around accusing Obama of favoring government intervention, pushing the U.S. towards socialism, and having anti-American views. She's particularly fierce critic of Obama's health care overhaul. While Bachmann is known for advocating a limited government, she's recently come under scrutiny for allegedly accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in agricultural subsidies for her family farm in Wisconsin. Congressmember Bachmann flubbed her hometown history when saying in an interview, quote, "John Wayne was from Waterloo, Iowa, and that's the kind of spirit that I have, too," in an interview she did on Fox and talking about running for president. Well, John Wayne was born nearly 150 miles away. It was the serial killer John Wayne Gacy who lived for a time in Waterloo.
Well, what I want them to know is, just like John Wayne was from Waterloo, Iowa, that's the kind of spirit that I have, too.
Bachmann's flubs are reminiscent of when she traveled to New Hampshire in March to speak to supporters. She suggested the Revolutionary War began in Concord, New Hampshire, rather than Lexington and Concord.
What I love about New Hampshire and what we have in common is our extreme love for liberty. You're the state where the shout was heard around the world at Lexington and Concord.
Well, to discuss all this and more, we're joined by two guests. From Minneapolis, Minnesota, we're joined by local journalist Karl Bremer. He has been following Michele Bachmann's political career for the last decade from Stillwater, Minnesota, which is where the Bachmanns currently reside. Karl Bremer runs the blog Ripple in Stillwater. This year, he was one of the winners of the Minnesota Society of Professional Journalists Page 1 Awards for Best Use of Public Records. Here in the studio, we're joined by journalist Michelle Goldberg, author of several books, including Kingdom Coming, The Rise of Christian Nationalism. Goldberg's work has appeared in Rolling Stone, The Nation, The Guardian, and elsewhere, senior correspondent for the American Prospect and a columnist for the Daily Beast. Karl, let's start with you. As Michelle Goldberg launches her campaign for president, as Michele Bachmann launches her campaign for president, give us her background. Talk about who Congressmember Bachmann is.
Michele Bachmann got her start in Stillwater, Minnesota, running on a school board slate of candidates in 1999. School board races are traditionally nonpartisan in Minnesota, but she was part of a very partisan GOP slate of candidates that ran that year. They lost. And the following year, Bachmann ran for state senate. She knocked off a longtime moderate Republican incumbent in a district in Stillwater in 2000 and won the race. 2 years later, she ran again. That was following redistricting in 2000, and she won in 2002. Served there until 2006 when she ran for Congress. Her entire political career has been pretty much aimed at promoting Michele Bachmann first.
Michelle Goldberg, you too have been following Michele Bachmann. Talk about the views that you feel are especially important to understand and her whole career development.
Well, I think to understand her, she is, even more than Sarah Palin, probably more than any political figure, maybe short of Mike Huckabee, a perfect product of the religious right. You know, she came out of the big fundamentalist, or the big evangelical upsurge of the 1970s. Like many evangelicals, including Pat Robertson, was initially enamored of Jimmy Carter, who was the first modern born-again candidate. Like the movement as a whole, she shifted abruptly to the right in the run-up to Reagan's election. And she often talks about, in her speeches, what she calls a Christian worldview, which is a really important concept, I think, for people to understand, not just Michele Bachmann, but much of the modern right. It essentially holds that Christianity, or at least their version of Christianity, is a total ideology. It has all the answers, not just to theological questions, but to historical questions, scientific questions, economic questions. And so, you know, what I've tried to get across in writing and speaking about Michele Bachmann is that she's not stupid, you know, and she's not Sarah Palin in that she's articulate. She's, I think, a little bit faster on her feet. She's just incredibly steeped in a body of knowledge that is not. She's incredibly steeped in a corpus of facts that aren't true facts. She's incredibly steeped in the alternate reality of the movement that I called Christian nationalism in my first book. And so a lot of things that she says, you know, when she, for example, one of her most celebrated gaffes was when she talked about the founders of this country working tirelessly against slavery, and how, you know, at the dawn of America, it didn't matter what color you were, it didn't matter your economic status. Of course, you know, this is absurd and everybody laughed at it, but if you look at some of, say, the books that she worked on when she was a student at Oral Roberts University, or you look at the whole kind of canon of Christian nationalist revisionist history, this stuff is all a truism. And so to a lot of her base, this isn't going to sound like gaffes. This is their reality.
What books did she work on?
Well, one of the, I don't know why this hasn't gotten more attention. So when she was at Oral Roberts University, which is, you know, kind of a charismatic Pentecostal school in Oklahoma, she was a research assistant to a guy named John Eidsmoe, who she still cites as a major influence on her. Now, John Eidsmoe is, often people in the Christian right are kind of called theocratic. But he is unquestionably a theocrat. He wrote a book that she worked on called Christianity and the Constitution, which argued that the United States was founded to be a Christian theocracy and that it should become one again. John Eidsmoe is an interesting figure. He's someone who has been asked not to speak at Tea Party, has had invitations to speak at Tea Party rallies rescinded because of his ties to white supremacist groups and history of advocating for Southern secession.
Her family doesn't all agree with her.
Right. Yeah, she was born in a family of working-class Democrats and became born again in high school, you know, and kind of went on that path on her own. She has a stepsister who's a lesbian who they were close when they were growing up, and her stepsister has really shied away from the public eye, in part because her father is still married to Michele Bachmann's mother. But the stepsister, Helen LaFave, you know, there are a couple of other siblings on that side of the family who have been really appalled to see, not just to see Michele Bachmann take the lead on on opposing gay marriage, especially given the fact that Helen and her partner have been together for over 20 years, but also the way that she has kind of distorted family's history, that she claimed at one point to have polled the 9 siblings. It's a blended family with 5 kids on one side and 4 on the other. She had claimed to poll them about gay marriage and said that the majority agreed with them, which... With her. With her, right, which shocked her stepbrother enough to go public, because he just said, not only is it not true, but, you know, what a shocking accusation to think about brothers and sisters kind of taking a vote about one of their members.
And what about her family, her kids, her husband?
Well, her kids, you know, her kids have not been that public. I think her older son is she sometimes talks about as being one of her closest advisors. She has another son who joined AmeriCorps, which, as you remember, she at one point talked about as being, you know, part of a kind of sinister campaign to indoctrinate children into one world government. And so we can assume that maybe he doesn't entirely share her fear. But her husband is an interesting figure because he's you know, she often talks about how they run a business. Their business is his Christian counseling service. It's hard to overestimate what a big role not just anti-gay marriage, but kind of anti-gay politics, period, played in her early political career. And her husband's really a part of that. He's often talked about the need, he's called in some interviews, he's called homosexuals barbarians who need to be educated. He says, you know, just because you have certain impulses doesn't mean you need to act on them. He's been associated with, you know, reparative therapy, which can be obviously incredibly damaging to people who undergo it and kind of try to change their immutable sexual orientation.
Do they raise foster children?
I think raise is the tricky word. You know, she often says, as recently as this week, she said that her family has raised 23 foster children. Sometimes she talks about it as if they're all in the house. You know, she'll say, I know the cost of food because I have, you know, 28 children and I go shopping and I have these huge bills. I think there's no doubt that she's had foster children, and that's commendable. But when you say raise, you probably, I think, assume that you're talking about a long period of time. And she had a foster care license for 7.5 years. It allowed her to have 3 children at a time. Everyone I've talked to, including, you know, senior social workers in Stillwater, said that some of these kids some of them she might have had for more than a year, some of them she had for a couple of days, or a couple of weeks. I don't know if you could say that somebody who stayed in your house for a couple of weeks, you certainly deserve a lot of credit for giving them shelter. I don't know that you could say that you raised them.
Karl Bremer, how is Congressmember Bachmann perceived in Stillwater, where you're based?
Well, she may live in Stillwater, but she's never really had the support of the city of Stillwater. In her 3 elections to Congress, she's never won the city of Stillwater. She moved from her home in the city to a very much more conservative precinct 2 years ago, and it wasn't until last year that she could even win her own precinct. So, you know, her base of support in her district is more to the west side of the district and north, northern Washington County, Forest Lake, Hugo, the rural areas of outside of St. Cloud, Wright County, where the former GOP candidate for governor Tom Emmer came from last year. So it's kind of a mistake to come looking at Stillwater to find the typical Bachmann supporter. This is a mistake that national reporters are already starting to make, and I think you really need to look at the votes to find out who really did put Michele Bachmann into office.
Who put Michele Bachmann into office, Karl Bremer?
I think predominantly conservative Christians, evangelical Christians in this district, very conservative businessmen, Tea Partiers, Tea Party types who don't believe that government can serve really any useful purpose in their life, and they don't want to pay for government. Small government, low tax supporters, I think, are the predominant base of Michele Bachmann.
Who funds